All right. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at this workshop on the Cap and Trade Auction Proceeds Fifth Triennial Investment Plan. My name is Mario Cruz, and I'm with the California Air Resources Board, or CARB for short. I'm the chief of the Climate Investments Branch, which oversees the implementation of California climate investments. We have a Spanish.
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead.
My apologies, Mario. Please continue.
No, go ahead. I'll let you go first.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Just to relay the same in Spanish for our opening. Muy buenas tardes y gracias por acompañarnos en este taller sobre el quinto plan trienal de inversiones de los ingresos del programa de techo de emisiones de CARB. Mi nombre es Mario Cruz y trabajo en el Consejo de Recursos de Aire de California, o CARB, para abreviar. Soy el jefe de la subdivisión de inversiones climáticas que supervisa la implementación de las inversiones climáticas de California.
We have a Spanish channel available today. If you would like to join to listen to a Spanish interpretation of the webinar, please click on the globe icon that will appear shortly and select Spanish. If you have questions, you'll be able to ask them in Spanish via the Q&A feature. You will also be able to raise your hand and share your question or comment in Spanish during the question and discussion session in the interpreter, and the interpreter will relay your question or comment to us in English.
Y queremos dejarles saber que tenemos un canal dedicado en español para el programa del día de hoy. Si desea escuchar una interpretación al vivo durante el seminario web, seleccione el icono de un globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla, que aparecerá aquí en breve, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si tiene preguntas, podrá hacerlas en español también a través de la función de preguntas y respuestas, o QIA, que aparece en su pantalla. También podrá levantar la mano y compartir su pregunta o comentario en español durante la sesión de preguntas y la discusión, y un intérprete le ayudará para transmitir su comentario en inglés. And just a reminder for those listening in English, in the event we have a Spanish comment or question, you can also hear a live interpretation of that comment by selecting the globe icon that will appear at the bottom of your screen and select the language English to hear live rendering of that comment. Thank you, Mario. Back to you.
All right, the Fifth Triennial Investment Plan, or Investment Plan for short, is an administration document that the Department of Finance, in consultation with CARB, is statutorily required to submit to the Legislature every 3 years to guide the expenditures of cap and trade auction proceeds. CARB and the Department of Finance are pleased to be kicking off this effort. Our goal today is to collect your feedback and answer your questions at this early stage of working on the investment plan. We also hope to continue this conversation with interested parties throughout the investment plan development process and encourage you to reach out if you are interested in engaging further. Before we proceed, I'd like to note that this workshop is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website. We will provide additional information at the end of the presentation, including the website link and our contact information. Before we get started, I'd like to provide some information to help guide us through the process of this workshop. For those of you joining us online or by phone, please note that your computer microphone or phone has been automatically muted before joining the meeting to minimize background noise. If you need technical assistance during the meeting, the best thing to do is to email the GGRF program at arb.ca.gov email, or type your question into the Q&A. There are several ways to interact with us and share your comments and questions at this workshop. When we get to the discussion section of the agenda, we'll be using the raised hand feature on Zoom, which allows you to raise your hand and for us to unmute you so you can share your comment and questions. You can also raise your hand by using the Zoom web or app-based platform and clicking on the hand icon. If you are participating by phone today, you can use *9 to raise your hand on the phone. Throughout this webinar, you can also use the question and answer function to ask questions, and we'll do our best to respond. I'll now turn it over to Sarah Isant, Deputy Secretary for Climate Policy at the California Environmental Agency, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mario. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Isant, and I am the new Deputy Secretary for Climate Policy at Cal EPA. On behalf of Cal EPA and the Climate Action Team, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you attending the first public workshop on developing the Cap and Trade Auction Proceeds Fifth Investment Plan. California has been a trailblazer in addressing climate change, and our regulations and grant incentive programs serve as models nationally and globally for how jurisdictions can act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while providing environmental, economic, and public health co-benefits. The Climate Change Investments Program is an important component of California's efforts to fight climate change, and this year marks its 10th anniversary. Over the past decade, California Climate Investments has significantly contributed to Californians' well-being by mitigating greenhouse gases, reducing air pollutant emissions, fostering a vibrant economy, and building a more climate resilient and equitable future. There are too many programs to name, but to give you a sense of the range of programs and the types of benefits accruing to communities, these investments have facilitated the construction of over 11,000 affordable housing units, distributed over 400,000 rebates for clean vehicles, and supported the conservation or restoration of nearly 1 million acres of land. To fulfill the state's ambitious goals of carbon neutrality by 2045, we need to intensify our efforts to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions while keeping our commitments to advancing environmental justice and equity. As outlined in the 2022 Scoping Plan Update for advancing carbon neutrality, the state needs to continue its three-pronged approach, including incentives, regulations, and carbon pricing, to accelerate the adoption of clean technology and energy while increasing actions on natural and working lands to fight climate change and protect public health. As we look ahead, we have the opportunity to engage in strategic planning to identify areas for priority climate investment. Now, more than ever, we must develop an investment plan to provide recommendations to the legislature on funding priorities that maximize the benefits of climate spending. These benefits not only achieving substantial greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also ensuring that we're maximizing benefits to disadvantaged and low-income communities and individuals, addressing environmental injustices and advancing equity. We seek your partnership in understanding your community's needs, potential funding gaps, and your priorities for these funds. Your insights will help shape the eventual investment plan recommendations and inform future funding decisions to better address critical needs. We are deeply grateful for your time and participation this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah. Now onto the agenda for this afternoon. We'll first move into a presentation by CARB staff. We'll provide a brief overview of California climate investments and the process to develop the investment plan, including principles used to guide recommendations. We will then hear from a panel of speakers representing both state and non-state agencies to share their perspectives on future priorities for climate investments. We will then wrap up with a discussion portion of today's workshop for participants to share input and ask questions. Now for an overview of California climate investments and the investment plan development process, I will hand it over to Sierra Makarowski. Sierra?
Great, thanks, Mario. So what is California Climate Investments and where do the funds come from? California Climate Investments is a statewide initiative that puts billions of cap and trade dollars to work reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the economy, and improving public health and the environment, particularly in disadvantaged and low-income communities and households. California Climate Investments includes almost 90 programs with a wide range of project types, including affordable housing, renewable energy, public transportation, zero-emission vehicles, sustainable agriculture, recycling, and much more. The funds for California Climate Investments are generated by the Cap and Trade Program, which is one component of a suite of California climate policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Cap and Trade Program includes an allowance auction mechanism that generates proceeds. The state's portion of the proceeds are deposited into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which funds programs under California climate investments. This slide shows how many different state agencies are administering the broad range of California climate investments programs. Currently, 24 state agencies are administering these diverse programs, and here at CARB, we have a dual role. We have an oversight role across the California climate investments portfolio, including establishing funding guidelines, quantification methodologies, and reporting procedures. CARB is also an administering agency with programs of its own. As part of the legislative requirements for California climate investments, 35% of project funding must benefit priority populations, including disadvantaged communities and low-income communities and households. In collaboration with administering agencies, CARB develops priority population investment targets each fiscal year for programs that receive funding. These are to ensure that California climate investments meets or exceeds its overall statutory minimum requirements. Cumulatively, 74% of project dollars are providing a benefit to priority populations as of the end of May 2023. This year marks the 10-year anniversary for the California Climate Investments portfolio. The program has grown significantly in size and impact in the past decade, from just 12 agencies administering 20 programs in 2014 to today having twice as many agencies administering almost 90 programs. California climate investments drives significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions and supports the transition to a low carbon future while providing environmental, economic, and public health co-benefits. California climate investments covers a diverse portfolio of programs and project types that range from community-led projects like community car sharing, community composting, and the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, to large-scale projects like transit-oriented affordable housing. California Climate Investments is also implementing a variety of nature-based solutions to sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions through strategies like protecting forests from catastrophic wildfire, supporting sustainable agricultural lands, and growing urban forests. More recently, there is also a growing suite of building decarbonization projects, charging infrastructure projects, and cross or multi-sectoral project types. This graphic shows the expected achievements from implemented projects. We expect to release the updated data with the upcoming 2024 annual report in the spring, which will cover projects through November 30th, 2023. Now, I want to provide a quick overview of how state agencies administering our programs receive funds and the role of investment plans in this process. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, California climate investments are funded by cap-and-trade auction proceeds deposited into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The legislature appropriates funds to state agencies to administer programs or to make specific expenditures. 65% of GGRF funds are set aside for continuous appropriations that support transportation, housing programs, and safe and affordable drinking water for Californians. In 2021, the legislature also created a $200 million continuous appropriation to extend CAL FIRE's funding for forest health, fire prevention, and fuels reduction projects through fiscal year 2028-2029. The remaining funds are appropriated each year as part of a deliberative budget process. As of August 2023, over $26 billion has been appropriated to 24 state agencies. The investment plan is intended to guide the legislature in their decision-making by providing priority funding recommendations. In the next few slides, my colleague Chen Mittlener will delve into the investment plan background and the process we have in mind for developing the upcoming investment plan.
Thank you, Sierra, and good afternoon, everyone. As Sierra mentioned, my name is Chen Mittlener. I work in the Climate Investment Branch, and I'm very excited to share with you today the approach we have in mind for developing the Fifth Triennial Investment Plan. First, please allow me to provide you with some background information about investment plans, because with so many plans floating around, it can be confusing. So I will first share with you what investment plan is and what it does. So investment plans serve as a tool to identify priority investments for cap and trade auction proceeds that can achieve multiple benefits and advance the state's multifaceted goals, as mentioned by Deputy Secretary Aizamt. As was mentioned earlier, the Department of Finance works with CARB and other state agencies to develop high-level recommendations for priority investments. Both CARB and the Department of Finance view this as an opportunity to work together with the interested parties to collect input for consideration in the investment plan. I want to also note that the priority investments ultimately identified in the investment plan serve as recommendations to the legislature, highlighting potential funding opportunities rather than guaranteeing funding, because the legislature determined and the administration determined the appropriation through the annual deliberative budget process. And for this upcoming fifth investment plan, we are planning to use a three-pronged approach to collect information that will guide the development of the recommendations. The first prong involves collecting information from recent legislation and regulations, pertinent state plans, and reports to develop guiding principles, which we will talk about in the following slides. The second prong centers around data analysis and creating metrics based on the guiding principles and performing data analysis to shape our recommendations. The third prong focuses on outreach and public engagement, which we hope to accomplish by hosting roundtable meetings, conducting public workshops like what we are doing now, and collecting feedback through public comment dockets to solicit input from internal and external partners. Information gathered through this process will be synthesized into a set of recommendations in the investment plan to identify priority sectors and investment types. Now, I want to highlight the proposed guiding principles that will steer the development of the upcoming investment plan. These principles are formulated following review of state plans, with the scoping plan update serving as the primary reference alongside recent state legislation and the priorities, such as Assembly Bill 680, which addresses workforce standards, and Assembly Bill 1757, which calls for the expansion of nature-based climate solutions. They aim to identify projects and initiatives that not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also promote environmental justice, climate resilience, and economic prosperity for all Californians. And specifically, these principles include work towards carbon neutrality by mid-century, maximize co-benefits to protect public health, strengthen community adaptation and resilience, foster equitable workforce development, and build economic resilience to facilitate an inclusive transition, advance equity and environmental justice, as well as partner across all levels of government, including tribal authorities and the private sector, to leverage funding and promote multidisciplinary innovation and equitable adoption of climate solutions. These principles are adaptable and we will evolve based on continuous feedback, and we welcome your thoughts on them. As mentioned above, metrics development and the data analysis are important to guide the recommendations on priority project types, ensuring the investment recommendations align with the state's overarching goals. And to develop the metrics, our plan is to expand upon the metrics established for the previous investment plan while incorporating guiding principles formulated for the fifth plan to facilitate additional metrics development. This slide presents some examples of the metrics we are considering for each guiding principle. For instance, to further our goal of achieving carbon neutrality by mid-century, we are proposing metrics such as reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, decreases in vehicle miles traveled, and the carbon sequestration through land conservation. Once the metrics are finalized, we will review the available data sources, primarily focusing on data from the California Climate Investments Reporting and Tracking System, and using supplemental data sources such as the census data, CalEnviroscreen data, which includes the socioeconomic, demographic, environmental, and public health information to guide the data analysis. These data sets will enable us to conduct data analysis to evaluate the effectiveness of each investment type in advancing the state's goals. In terms of the timeline, we are starting our process with today's workshop, where we are hoping to get your initial input on the guiding principles, metrics, and the investment gaps and the priorities. Over the next few months, we'll be working with state partners and hopefully many of you to develop a draft investment plan. The draft investment plan will come out in late summer for public comment, followed by another public workshop in early fall to present the identified investment priorities and collect feedback on the recommendations. Later in the fall, we'll give an informational update to our board and make updates to the draft investment plan based on the feedback and any additional public comments as appropriate. Finally, the Department of Finance will submit the final investment plan to the Legislature in January 2025. Okay, so now we have talked about the background about climate investment, as well as the process we have in mind to develop the upcoming investment plan, its guiding principles, and how we plan to prioritize the funding recommendations. Of course, our goal today is to hear from you or about your investment needs and the priorities, as well as to get your feedback on what we are proposing. So to get the conversation going, we have invited a few leaders in climate policy to share their perspectives on future climate investments in several topic areas. And before we dive into their perspectives, we will have each of them to give a quick self-introduction. First up is Amy Wang, who is the Director for Capacity Building at the Green Lining. Amy, when you are ready, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, all. My name is Emmy Wang, Director for Capacity Building at the Green Lining Institute. Man, I have been through, I think, maybe 2 or 3 of these investment plan cycles, all of which is to say my organization, Green Lining, we have long been concerned about California climate investments because it is the major funding source that is investing in climate solutions guided by equity and aimed at impacted communities. So my organization, we've been critical in some of the early legislation, SB 535 and AB 1550, which directs investments toward priority communities. We continue to attract and push for specific programs like transformative climate communities and regional climate collaboratives. This is the game in town when it comes to funding climate transitions in California. So I'm happy to be here, and I'll pass it back to CARB.
Thank you, Amy. That was a very great self-introduction. Our next one in line is Dr. Giorgio Curti, and Giorgio is the co-owner and the project director at Cultural Geographics Consulting, as well as an adjunct professor at San Diego State University. Dr. Curti, when you are ready, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. You already gave a little background about myself, so I don't need to repeat that. So this is my first workshop. This is a project I was brought into in the tribal context. I myself am not native. This is a project I'm teaming with Dr. Peter Nelson at UC Berkeley, who's a citizen of Great and Rancheria, tribal citizen of Great and Rancheria, and he couldn't be with us because he's knee surgery right now. But I thank you for bringing me on to talk about some concerns that tribes may have. I work for several tribes throughout California, as well as the greater Pacific Northwest and the Southwest. And yeah, I'm looking forward to providing some insights. I don't have the authority to speak for any specific tribe, but I have been given the authority from several tribes to speak to tribal interest and concerns on these matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Giorgio. That would be great. We are looking forward to hear your perspectives later on. Our next speaker is Bernadette Austin, and she is the Chief Executive Officer at Civic Well. Bernadette, when you are ready, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to join this wonderful esteemed group of folks. Bernadette Austin, as mentioned, I'm the CEO of Civic Well. We've been around for over 40 years, formerly Local Government Commission. I also wear a couple of other hats. Notably, I'm the co-chair for the Office of Health Equity, the California Department of California Department of Public Health Office of Health Equity Advisory Committee. And so I'll be speaking from both of those perspectives. From the Civic Well perspective, you know, we have been working with local governments and their community partners, again, for 4 decades. And I'll just note that we are interested in supporting capacity building, a really big theme for today's conversation, as well as bringing together like-minded folks. And notably, we convene the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation, also known as ARCA. So if anyone's interested in learning more, I can put that provide that information to folks. Thank you for having us.
Great to have you on the panel, Bernadette, and we are definitely very interested in hearing about the local perspective. Our next one in line is the Deputy Executive Officer here at California Air Resources Board, Dr. Sydney Burgess. And when you are ready, Sydney, please go ahead.
Everyone, yes, Sydney Burgess. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I am the Deputy Executive Officer of Mobile Sources and Incentives at the California Air Resources Board. Very happy to be with you, especially since CARB's commitment to advance climate efforts and reduce air pollutant emissions and protect public health really lies in us using a suite of tools, including incentives, regulations, and programs to really help promote the development of sustainable communities and clean transportation solutions, contributing to a cleaner and healthier California. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Sydney, and great to have you here today. Our next speaker is Amanda Hansen. She is the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency. Amanda, are you ready for a quick self-intro?
Thanks, Chen. I am ready. Hello, everyone. As Chen mentioned, I serve as the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at our Natural Resources Agency. And it largely means 2 things that I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about today, which is ensuring that the work California does to take action on climate includes work in the nature-based solutions sector, and also thinking about how our efforts to mitigate and reduce our emissions, achieve carbon neutrality, how many of those efforts also support California's approach to building climate resilience and reducing climate risks for people and nature across the state. Our agency is tasked with coordinating the state's climate adaptation strategy, and we produce this every 3 years. We produce an update, and so I'll want to talk about sort of the nexus between our work as well. And thanks for having me.
Great, thank you, Amanda, and we are excited to have you on the panel. Our final speaker to introduce himself today is Derek Kirk. Derek is the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Climate at the Labor and Workforce Development Agency. Please take it away when you are ready, Derek.
Thanks so much, Chen, and a pleasure to be with you all today. As Chen said, I work for the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency. My portfolio, I think is really fabulous. It's at the intersection really of economic and workforce development, particularly with the climate lens. And so I co-lead the Governor's California Jobs First initiative, and particularly our regional investment initiative, where we have funded and are working to establish 13 regional economic development collaboratives, or what we call Jobs First collaboratives, that are working to develop strategies to define more equitable and climate-focused economies moving forward. I also worked with all of our 7 departments, boards, and panels under the labor agency to identify ways in which we can invest additional resources into Californians, and particularly in partnership with industry to ensure we are training up a climate workforce for today and tomorrow. So really fabulous to be here with you all today. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Derek. We are very much looking forward to hearing your perspective on the workforce development. And I want to thank you all for being here today. And we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives about future climate investments. And we will structure today's discussion by topic areas. The first 2 topic areas include climate neutrality and climate adaptation and resilience. And our first set of speakers are Amy and Amanda. Amy, thank you for joining us today. We are aware of your organization's efforts in preparing communities to confront the challenges of climate change and would value your thoughts on the future investments needed to address climate change and also build climate resilience. When you are ready, please take it away, Amy.
Well, thanks, Chen. And nice to see everyone again. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're starting with this question that is really focused on the intersections of climate change and community resilience, because those 2 things go very much hand in hand. My organization, we're called the Green Lending Institute. We define climate resilience as the ability of communities to withstand, recover, and learn from past disasters. And that kind of community resilience as being integral to preparing for climate resilience. This is probably not news to anyone here on this call right now, but you know, in the wake of the increasing climate crisis, in the wake of COVID-19, extreme levels of inequality that we see here in the United States today, we have to do what we can to make public investments that address the multiple needs of communities, economic, social, climate, public health, that meet the needs of communities who face the impacts of climate change first and worst. So for us, that means looking at those kinds of multiple health benefits and looking at both pollution reduction and climate reduction, GHG reduction at the same time. So just a couple quick points here in terms of the investments that communities need. Number 1, investment should make reductions in local pollution burden reduction co-equal to the goal of reducing kind of global emissions reduction. Number 2, along with that, making sure that investments advance health equity outcomes for all communities. Number 3, ending the use of all fossil fuels through the investments without investing in transition strategies that harm environmental justice communities. And then number 4 is requiring capacity building, community leadership, co-governance from the start to finish, right? These kinds of investments that have both procedural equity embedded in them. So procedural equity meaning who is involved in the room, who is making decisions, how are residents engaged, all the way to distributive equity. How are harms and burdens and benefits, how are those distributed equitably amongst populations? By following the thread on both of these, I think is most important for attacking both climate change and community resilience. You know, I think we're going to talk about some of the specific programs that we think are most impactful for communities. And one thing I just want to mention here as we're talking about this is that the CARB's investment plan is a valuable guiding document for how the legislature makes investment decisions. And those investment decisions are subject to the year-to-year whims of the annual California budget cycle. And so the other thing that I do think we need to be talking about is finding and resourcing a robust, enduring, year-to-year dedicated funding source for California making the climate transition and for communities being able to make that climate transition. The programs that my organization cares about, and these are programs that, again, are community focused, have community governance from the start, and invest in climate impact. So these are things that are like the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program, like the Community Resilience Centers, like Transformative Climate Communities. These programs, yeah, they go up and down in the funding from year to year. So as many of you know, right now, California is in a huge budget deficit. What we see in the governor's January proposed budget is those same programs, the programs that have, I would say, the most equity impacts. Those are zeroed out in this year's current January budget. You look 2 years ago, California had a budget surplus and those programs were riding high. And so that kind of instability it isn't going anywhere. It isn't making the investments we need for the long term in our community. So as we have this conversation about investment types, investment priorities, all of which is important, we also need to be thinking about the conversation around how are we going to resource these investments for the long term. California is going to need to continue to dedicate resources to making the climate transition, especially for environmental justice in the most impacted communities. And that piece needs to go along as we think about priorities. So I will stop there in the interest of time and yeah, pass it back to you, Jen.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing your perspective. I think you raise a really good point that we don't just want to hear about the gaps and priorities, but also think about the consistency and the stability of the funding, especially I think in the era of having a lot of federal money coming in. How do we leverage that to make sure the money could go a long way to benefit the communities? Is something definitely we want to have a deeper conversation about. So thank you, Amy. And Amanda, thanks for joining. We know building climate adaptation and resilience is an important topic for your agency. Can you please share your perspective on California climate investments with respect to this topic, as well as metrics the investment plan could take into account to help advance this efforts?
Thank you, Jen. Yes, this is a topic of great interest to me, so it's really a pleasure to be here and able to not only sort of share my views, but also hear from others about, how they think we might sort of advance this work together. I'll start by saying that many of CARB's existing, CCCI investments, they absolutely, of course, deliver greenhouse gas carbon benefits, but they also deliver resilience benefits. And I'll give a couple of examples sort of within the world of the Natural Resources Agency, but also outside. So for years, CARB has funded programs that deliver mitigation and adaptation benefits. Several of these programs were listed earlier, but I'll just tick through them. These are our wildfire prevention and forest health funds, investments made in urban and community greening, land conservation investments, wetland restoration, community composting, healthy soils investments. These are all project types that deliver a carbon or greenhouse gas benefit along with a climate resilience benefit. And as an example, I'll just explain, let's talk about urban and community greening. These trees and vegetation in cities and in communities can sequester and store carbon, but they can also deliver a lot of important resilience benefits, such as slowing and retaining more water, reducing risk of flooding in some communities. And depending on where you're making these investments, they can also protect California's most vulnerable communities to extreme heat. So I think when I think of sort of resilience, I think of it in terms of CARB's investments, where the top priority is achieving carbon neutrality. There's the potential to have a resilience layer that is considered that will help it create an additional benefit. Another example is wetland restoration. California has very few of our wetlands left. We have a lot of work to do in this space. Wetlands not only help sequester and store carbon, but they also reduce flooding risk for communities. They create space for biodiversity to thrive. They filter pollution. So, these are investments that can be made, again, in ways that protect particularly vulnerable communities in California. I will also just say at a higher level, many of the investments that CARB makes in housing, in energy, in transportation, these investments also deliver climate resilience benefit. And so I appreciate the work that's been done already to consider how those investments can support our resilience objectives. I'll take a minute now just to transition over to talking about what are California's resilience objectives. In 2021, we overhauled our state adaptation strategy. This is just sort of in line with where we were in the moment, which is a lot of sector-specific efforts to consider how to address the climate crisis most meaningfully and expeditiously. And so this statewide strategy really became a place where we identified at a very high level all of the elements of our work underway, and then allowed people as interested to sort of, click on something that's of interest. They want more details. Okay, you can go to the water resilience portfolio if you want to dig deep on our resilience efforts on water, or the wildfire and forest resilience action plan if you want to go deep on forests. CAPTI, the climate action plan for transportation and infrastructure. So this state adaptation strategy, I hope, our goal with the way that we organized it was to be very clear. What are our North Stars in thinking about climate investments to build resilience in California? And there are 6 of them that we outlined in this strategy, and that all of our efforts are sort of organized to drive on those 6 priorities. And they include things like strengthening protections for California's most climate vulnerable communities, building a climate resilient economy, accelerating the use of nature-based solutions to protect communities and to protect nature, et cetera. So, as I think about future climate investments, I would say, keep on supporting the work that is being supported now. Consider in other programs, how might these investments also deliver a resilience benefit? And in terms of metrics, pulling from our strategy to identify, within this strategy, something that we did in 2021 that was new is we included success metrics for the first time, and we put sort of timeframes for achieving them into the strategy itself. And so I think, aligning perhaps the way that CARB thinks about these resilience metrics for an energy program, to align that with the way that the state adaptation strategy has, considered what a useful metric might be. But at a minimum, I think aligning with those 6 North Stars, those like outcome-based priorities that I tick through, is a good way to think about how to ensure that the investments you make also deliver on California's climate adaptation strategy. And I'll just share for the group, we're due for another update to the strategy in 2024, and we'll be releasing a draft of that strategy pretty soon here. So to keep your eyes open for that. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for sharing your perspective, and we are looking forward to see to review the update of the strategy and looking at these North Stars you mentioned. So thanks, and we'll move on to the next set of topics, including public health, equity, and environmental justice. Our next two speakers in line are Bernadette and Sydney. Bernadette, great to have you here today. And I would like to ask you to please share with us your thoughts on investment priorities to better protect public health and advance equity. And with that, I'll pass it on to you. Thanks, Bernadette.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I conferred with my colleagues at the California Department of Public Health to get their insights on responding to this. And of course, we had deep alignment between public health priorities as well as the climate change priorities that we share at CivicWell. So 2 kind of key take-home messages. The first is, as we do in health, focus on prevention and systems change solutions. So in my mind, what we really need to do is continue to work towards ensuring that communities have a really strong baseline so that they are prepared to be resilient before we have these climate-related disasters, health-related disasters, and other emergencies. Whether you're learning from the pandemic, from a flood or a fire, there's a lot of similar preparation that needs to happen. The other piece really is, I think, piggybacking well on the previous panelists' comments, we have to be willing to name and address the root causes of inequities. And really, the goal here is to improve living conditions for everyone, with an emphasis on those who are impacted first and worst by climate change. And those are often the ones who are most climate vulnerable and facing inequalities. So focusing on prevention and systems change is my first sort of take-home message. The second is around prioritizing climate investments and opportunities for communities that are really continuing to face both historic and continuing inequities. So 2 approaches that I've discussed with my colleagues are taking a data-driven approach while also reducing barriers to accessing funds. I know that's something that CARB is really thinking quite a bit about, as well as some, I imagine, many of your attendees today. So what do we mean by data-driven approaches? Well, when you think about the disadvantaged community metrics or the DAC metrics, we can look at tools, for example, including the California Healthy Places Index. And so you can search that. For those who aren't familiar with that, it aggregates 25 sociodemographic variables that account for the variety of burdens that are related to health. I also think about not just looking at data, but thinking about how we are reducing barriers. So often what ends up happening is that the folks who are able to compete better, and those who continue to face challenges are continuing to be at a disadvantage. So we don't want to be rewarding those who can hire the best grant writers, but really focus on investing in the communities that are most impacted. At CivicWell, we've been working for over 4 decades and providing technical assistance and capacity building to support these very types of communities. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we mean is community-based organizations. Sometimes they are nonprofits, sometimes they are not. Sometimes they have fiscal agents, or they are all volunteer run. We're thinking about smaller jurisdictions. There are some jurisdictions that have an entire department who are dedicated to being able to apply for state and federal funding. And then there are some jurisdictions where you have a handful, literally a handful of staff who wear multiple hats. I also think about rural jurisdictions, tribal entities, and more. So I just want to make sure that we are finding ways to reduce those barriers, not just from these funds, but the variety of funds that are rolling out from the state. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks on that topic.
Thanks, Bernadette. Really well said. And as you mentioned, thinking about how to build, how to provide technical assistance is really at the core of the CCI, the California Climate Investments as well. And I'm really happy to hear that you're elevating that. So thank you. Our next speaker is Sydney, who will be sharing CARB's priorities to protect public health and advance equity. So with that, Sydney, please take it away.
Great, thank you. I'll just start by saying that I'm really glad to be seeing that the investment plan is centering on public health, environmental justice, and equity. They're certainly at the forefronts of our efforts at CARB, and it's really important not just for CARB's program, but also for the California Climate Investments portfolio to advance these priorities overall throughout the portfolio. At CARB, of course, we recognize the disproportionate impact of climate change and air pollution on disadvantaged communities, and we're certainly doubling down on our efforts to deliver meaningful health benefits to those most burdened by pollution. So about 70% of CARB's total climate investments have been invested in disadvantaged communities and low-income communities and households. That's roughly $1.9 billion that have been invested. So as we're navigating towards a cleaner and more equitable future, CARB really understands the critical role that communities play as experts in how climate investments can advance environmental justice and equity in their neighborhoods. So for example, we have the Community Air Protection Program and the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, or STEP. These are 2 of our community-driven programs that really showcase the power of local communities and actively working towards cleaner and healthier neighborhoods. We're also really dedicated to ensuring that those who receive the incentive funding really reach those who need it the most. So one example is through some of our programs that are intended to provide support to lower income consumers who live in priority populations to help them replace their older, higher polluting vehicles with newer and cleaner transportation. For those types of programs, we're adopting a needs-based approach that really targets outreach to communities that haven't traditionally participated in our incentive programs and are trying to provide tailored support for those with the highest need. Another example of this is the Community Air Grants Program. This is a dedicated effort providing targeted grants to local communities, which really aims to empower communities to both identify, prioritize, and implement air quality improvement projects, particularly in areas disproportionately affected by environmental burdens. As I'm sure most of you know, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and emissions that cause smog and pollution in California. So we're continuing to try to decarbonize the sector to achieve the state's climate, air quality, and public health goals. And so our low carbon transportation program really helps facilitate the adoption of clean fleets or accelerate the turnover of highly polluting diesel vehicles and off-road equipment to zero emission replacements, which helps the air, climate, and communities. Beyond kind of these traditional transportation modes, it's important that we continue to work to reduce air pollutants from other sectors, including reducing vehicle miles traveled and through new innovative approaches like using state-of-the-art satellite technology to identify and mitigate methane and other co-pollutant emissions from major methane emitting sectors. So satellite monitoring technology, this work is really complemented by other local scale monitoring efforts at CARB. We're focusing on communities that are overburdened by air pollution to help reduce exposure and protect public health. So I want to close by just affirming that we stand committed to protecting public health and prioritizing communities, advancing equity, and of course, building a healthier and more sustainable California. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Chen.
Thank you, Sydney, for sharing with us CARB's priorities. And it's really exciting to hear about CARB is adopting some of these cutting edge technologies to reduce emissions. So thanks for sharing. Our next two speakers will focus on sharing their perspectives about climate investment priorities to advance workforce development and inclusive transition. First, we will hear from Giorgio about the priority investments needed to facilitate an inclusive transition. And with that, over to you.
Thank you. As I've been listening today, I've been navigating different ways to enter this. I came in with an idea of how I want to enter this discussion. I think it's important for me to back up for a moment. I don't really like talking about myself because this isn't about me. But I think it's important to put into context a project that my team is currently working on with CARB is to identify systemic and structural barriers for Native American tribes, federally and non-federally recognized, for consultation, for inclusion, for environmental justice, and also to identify the way that CCI can better serve tribal needs, tribal concerns. So with that, in my work, 99% of the time, I'm on one side of the table with a tribe, and on the other side of the table are agency officials. So I think something very important to provide context for here with what I've been hearing is that there's been a lot of discussion of equity. There's been a lot of discussion of justice. There's been a lot of discussion of health and public health and what that means. But there's not been a recognition that all lands and airs of California are native lands, airs, and waters. All of these questions are always layered on top of the settler colonial realities we're currently living in. We cannot talk about health without talking about different ideas of what health is and does and for whom. We can't talk about justice without talking about the communities that have faced injustice, in this case, specifically Native American communities, in understanding how you even build a just system. You have to first identify the injustice that have occurred and create restoration for that. And around the context of metrics, I think something to consider is metrics when they're a quantitative approach, by definition, elides difference and or subsumes difference and homogenizes it, and therefore leaves out that difference in another way. So the recommendation would be around qualitative engagements. And this gets to this discussion around workforce development and sort of this inclusive transition. I found it interesting that it wasn't a just transition. So I think what's fundamentally important in tribal context, each tribe has dual status as a sovereign entity, and their tribal members who are sovereign citizens of native nations also are US citizens or citizens of the state of California. And so that dual status confers on them certain rights and opportunities that very often are neglected and marginalized in these considerations. I think it's fundamental to recognize when we say workforce development, who is defining that? If it's industry, and if it's industry defining what the workforce needs to be, then is it inclusive at all? Or does it just become exploitative? So I think these are fundamental considerations that have to be given in California Native American tribe context, and that engagement with tribes one-on-one as sovereign entities. No tribe can speak for another tribe unless that first tribe provides that opportunity, then each tribe has to speak for themselves. And so we need to be very careful when we're talking about health. How are we defining health? When we're talking about equity, how are we defining equity? When we're talking about at-risk communities, Indigenous peoples, Native California peoples are some of, if not the most at-risk peoples with the effects of colonial industrial impelled climate change. So those are sort of those contexts there I think we really have to think about, and think about with inclusive labor, because a lot of times inclusion, it's predefined difference. So if you don't fit within those differences, then you're not included. There has to be a system in place where the tribes are engaged and their expertise is followed in the development of these programs, of where investments go and how they go there. And this is even supported by recent White House guidance on Indigenous knowledge, which now formally recognizes Indigenous knowledge as an aspect of best available science. And this is a fundamental component, I think, that's essential to integrate into this. So the workforce development, again, it's an open question. Very often Native peoples are asked to be the workforce for their own destruction. I'm on a project right now where this very thing is happening, the destruction of a very sacred landscape. Oh, well, we'll give you jobs. And the tribe says, what, you're going to give us jobs to pay us to destroy our own heritage and inheritance in this plant and animals that are our kin, right? Our family. So I think these are really important contexts to consider here. And what are the economic premises that are driving this? What are our economic premises? Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Curdy, for sharing your perspective. I think, as you said, we are just embarking on the work with the tribes, and the CARB is just released a tribal workbook to share some information with tribes about how to access the CCI funding and other incentive fundings. So yes, we are just embarking this work. So we really appreciate bringing this perspective. Our next speaker is Derek. Derek will share with us his perspective on investment priorities for workforce development. And with that, floor is yours. Derek, please go ahead. Looks like Derek might have some technical difficulty.
Sorry about that, Chen. I am here now.
Perfect. Glad to hear.
Will you do me a favor and re-ask your question?
Yes, absolutely. So can you please share with us your perspective on the investment priorities for workforce development, considering your background?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chen. And I'll just reiterate what a privilege it is to be a part of this conversation. We're at this really interesting point where we are both recognizing the vast inequities of our economy and the need to invest in a more climate-focused economy. And I think a lot of folks think that those things are contradictory, but they aren't. They are so beautifully and intricately interconnected. And as we think about making investments in workforce development, we think it's really important to ensure that folks remember and frame the conversation in a way that is different than we have in the past. Oftentimes, we think about workforce development and training workers through training programs or in partnership with our education institutions. And we often fail at engaging the folks that are creating the jobs in a really effective fashion, understanding the skills that are needed in those occupations, and looking at new regulatory and policy requirements that are affecting the way that those jobs are shaped. And so we often make investments in job creation over here or infrastructure investments, and we make investments in workforce development over here. And as we think about it, we think it's really critical to make those investments jointly. So rather than creating workforce programs over here, right, independently, we are driving towards connecting the dots. And oftentimes for us, that looks like partnering with the folks that are building the new infrastructure, or the folks that are creating the jobs, that are building the zero emission vehicles, or pick your infrastructure project or your manufacturing project, and working with them to identify ways in which they can invest in workforce training and in workforce development in partnership with the systems that we manage at the labor agency and the systems that are developed with our educational institutions. It allows for, we believe, greater outcomes in ensuring that folks aren't just trained up for jobs, but that they are trained with industry for jobs that exist right now. And that they are able to access those jobs in order to support their families. What we really believe is the opportunity for our system to come in is to, in partnership with industry, as we're looking at training folks, to provide supportive services and meet people where they are. Whether that is through, connecting with childcare supportive services, connecting with transportation vouchers, and things like that. And so it's really about kind of bringing these two conversations together and making those investments in really, really intentional ways as we kind of move forward, again, to make sure that we're training folks for jobs that are currently in existence. And as our job creators are creating those jobs, that they're thinking about the people that they want to partner with to do that work and support in the long term.
Yes, agreed, Derek. Thank you for sharing their perspective. And I think taking a holistic view of workforce development is really critical. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. With that, I want to give you, Derek, and all our speakers a big thank you for being here today. We really appreciate you to come to the workshop and share your thoughtful comments. You have provided a lot of great feedback for us to consider, and we are really appreciative for the food for thought. With that, we would like to move to our next agenda item. So we want to open the floor to hear the comments and the questions from the rest of our workshop participants. So building on the perspectives shared by the panelists, we have lined up a few questions to further the discussion today. But before we dive into the questions, I want to quickly go over how we will be facilitating the discussion today. If you are participating through Zoom on your computer or your digital device, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol on the bottom of your screen. And if you're calling in via your phone, you can use number 9 to raise your hand. When it is your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you're online, you will see a window pop up alerting you that the host has unmuted you, and you will need to click the unmute button. After that, you can speak. If you're on the phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted and you can begin to talk. And I just want to have a quick reminder that with a lot of participants in attendance, we kindly ask each speaker to please limit your speaking time to under 3 minutes to ensure equal airtime for all. And we'll let you know when you have reached 3 minutes, and we'll give you a few moments to finish your thoughts before muting you. Okay, so now, with that squared away, onto the questions. These questions are meant to guide the discussion. We are looking for information specifically in these areas, but we are also interested in your broader feedback and input, and of course, happy to answer any clarifying questions. First question is that, do you have any feedback on the guiding principles or metrics for data analysis? And next is, what are the investment gaps and the priorities to advance the state's climate, environmental, economic, public health, as well as equity goals? Okay, I'm going to leave this slide up so you can review the questions and we can start calling on raised hands.
All right, so we have our first hand from Evan Edgar. I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes, and I'll just let you know when we've hit 3 minutes and give you a little bit to wrap up before we return you to mute. Let's go to Evan.
Hello, Evan Edgar, live from the California Compost Coalition. Yeah, the guiding principles are great. And I would add some near term. One thing we're facing in California and the globe is having near-term issues. So something that will happen near term, then a long term would be important. We can't wait till 2045 to be carbon neutral. Let's look on plans to get something ready by 2030. So let's do that. on feedback on metrics, there's two good metrics. CARB puts out the mid-year data for California climate investments. And one of the biggest one is cost per ton of greenhouse gases. So the cap and trade program has different cost metrics, and the biggest bang for the buck, what's cost effective, what's working now. We have a lot of good data from a lot of projects out there. And one of the biggest ones is cost per ton. And of course, I'm here for compost and anaerobic digestion. And our cost per greenhouse gas is about 40 to 50 a ton for every dollar invested, which is pretty good. Where a lot of ZEV programs are near zero for ZEV electrification for fleets are about 1,000 to 3,000 a ton. So, and that's way off in the future. So I would focus on cost per ton, and benefiting priority populations is a key one, where some of the food waste grants we do is 97% and organic grants are 77%. So we do a lot of work to benefit priority populations. So you have a great set of metrics already from past projects that you should lean upon. And the third one is gap. What is that investment gap and priorities to advance the state? A lot of these grant programs that are under cap and trade are oversubscribed, per se. One of the grant programs that came out for Cal Recycle just came out for $130 million of compost anaerobic digestion, was 3 times oversubscribed. There's $390 in projects out there that applied for grants, and only $130 million was available. So I think if you look at the what's been a gap analysis, is what programs are shovel ready to go, and what are oversubscribed. And we have really good history as part of this program. So let's lean on some of what is working in the near term, short-lived climate pollutants, dollars per ton, priority populations, and being oversubscribed. Thank you on behalf of the California Compost Coalition.
Great, thank you for sharing your perspective. I don't see any more hands right now from the attendees. Oh, now I do. Kieran, you should now be able to talk.
Hi, a couple of things regarding the guiding principle. I understand it's about climate investment, but there is no, like, it seems like it is not fairly distributed, in my view. Like, it should be land conservation, water conservation, and air pollution, conservation as well. Regarding the feedback and metrics for the data analysis, there is no data that measures how much water usage is, the wasted, basically. Like, we know the water usages from each river and, from rainwater reservoirs and all that stuff, but there is nothing that showcases that how the metrics for basically how much wasted water is there, and regarding the investment gaps, I think, and priorities, the third question basically, and the equity goal would be one of the first things, like, for First Nations. Sorry, I'm from Canada originally, so we say First Nations. From First Nations, one of the things that, there is nothing that showcases the lessons that they have, that could be shared with a regular farmer in Kern County, right? Like how to take care of the land and how to conserve water, and at the same time showcasing, the crops that will actually make, be beneficial. That regarding, like, for me, water conservation is a big part because it's depleted everywhere in the world. There is no climate investment regarding desalination plants, right? I saw that, there's a website link that one can click on and go there to see stuff. But I think it's very clear, like, a Kern County farmer is not going to go to a website, right? So there has to be an outreach program. So those will be my simple points. And I apologize if I missed something in regards to, like, I was just sharing what I think. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for sharing what you think. We appreciate it. Do we have any other hands from the attendees? Okay, it looks like we actually have a hand from a panelist. So Giorgio, if you want to talk, you are welcome to.
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping to interrogate Derek a little, but it doesn't look like he's on anymore. Again, being in the position working with tribes and seeing what often is some of the most detrimental impacts on lands and airs and waters, and how natural resources are cultural resources. There was a statement earlier about how, you know, we can manage the land or how we can help build wetlands. We need to move away from this notion of management to stewardship and recognize that stewardship has an association too. There's an associative integrity. We often create these fictions of reason, such as nature, culture, society, environment, human, non-human. These are these artificial constructs that we often confuse for reality itself. And this often dictates our policies and what we're doing. So for example, very often there's environmental movements which themselves are marginalizing to tribal communities and their deep time and deep space relationships to lands and airs and waters and animals and plants and geological materials and geographical features that are fundamental, right? So when Derek spoke, he brought up the context of partnering with industry. What I would like to know is how he and his office are holding industry accountable. That is a central question. We can look at this idea of sustainability and the three pillars of sustainability we all know are economics, environment, and society/people. But we also know that among these three pillars, unless the economic is for profit, then all of a sudden environment and people don't matter if that economic premise is not being met. This is the same logic that brought us colonial and industrial induced climate change in the first place. We cannot navigate out of this difference. And I believe that's what the gentleman who stated he was originally from Canada, I believe that was part of the point he may have been getting at. There's different ways of existing with the land and the water and the air. And when we keep persisting in these ways, when we use metrics that are defining the future based on a very limited idea of the past, through modeling, through statistical analysis, through metric creation, there's an attempt either to marginalize wittingly or unwittingly or assimilate. We need to be very careful that assimilation and colonialism, they are not a singular event. They're an ongoing system and structure. And so we need to question what our assumptions are. And the first assumption is the economic assumption. How are our own economics perhaps providing, in a sense, a religious fervor of what needs to be done without even questioning what that is? It's an unquestioned reality when there's a multitude ways of existing and there's a multitude and a multiplicity of different economic systems being undermined, capacities for collective continuance being undermined when these are not directly taken into consideration. So I'm hoping that we can carry on this conversation when perhaps Derek is here, or others within that sort of realm of the office. So thank you.
Thanks, Giorgio, for sharing your perspectives. I think we are very open to hear about your thoughts on the metrics. We understand sometimes we have to rely on the past data, but we are very open to hearing your perspectives about what kind of additional metrics that could help us to develop a forward-looking document using some of the metrics that you might have in mind. So yes, we are very open to have continued conversation with you. Thanks.
All right, now I think I saw another hand from a panelist and I see one returning hand from an attendee. So I'll go to Bernadette, then back to the attendees, and we'll see if any other folks also want to talk as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll keep my remarks short because I realize that I've already had an opportunity to speak. So I just wanted to address the first bullet and the last bullet. Regarding the first bullet, I think that we can really look at taking a human-centered approach. So when we think about what the impacts are for individual humans as well as communities, this is the kind of approach that can really help us ensure that the approaches and strategies that we use as we're working on reducing greenhouse gas emission don't inadvertently create or worsen inequities. So some of this discussion is really pointing at that. So as we're doing, we can focus on, there's an opportunity to focus on jobs or impacts for the environment, but really making sure that a human-centered approach is one of the guiding principles, can help address some of the issues that are raised. I also wanted to highlight something for the benefit of the last bullet point. So CivicWell, we are at CivicWell, we're working with the California Resilience Partnership. So I encourage people to look up information about that. This is an effort that is really working at the intersection of public and philanthropic funders who are interested in climate-related investment. And so as we partner with organizations like Resilient Communities Catalyst, and as I mentioned before, the Alliance for Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation, or ARCA, I think that there's really an opportunity for us to think more broadly about investments. And I'll just kind of give you an example. One of the things that I think about often is that we get really excited about the Inflation Reduction Act and about the opportunities for these climate investments. However, we really need to see them as a down payment. They can't happen alone. So really looking at what the longer term goals are and looking at funding strategies that can help support those goals in the long run is just going to be a really critical approach, so that we have ways to identify and fund these critical gaps in sort of the pipeline of projects and initiatives that we're.
Great, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. So now we'll go to the attendees, and I think, Kieran, you have your hand raised again. I'm thinking that might be on purpose, but let me know if it's on accident.
It was on purpose. It was just to say, like, the gentleman with the nicest beard I've ever seen. How he explained the process. I absolutely agree with that. And the gentle lady after that, like, exactly, it's about how people are, and why not to learn from what we already have, rather than having economics being the leading reason why to invest and where to invest, right? Like, it's okay to lose some money to get the better, to do well for the next generation, because we already have screwed up the entire environment, right? So what you guys are doing is absolutely phenomenal, but this is just trying to give 2 cents of our views in there. I just want to, basically the reason is I just wanted to appreciate the gentle lady and the gentleman prior to me for highlighting it in a way more succinct and intelligent way. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran. And I think you really brought it home that we are really trying to not focus just on the economics, but taking a balanced and holistic approach to when we think about the investment priorities. So if you look at our guiding principles, we are really trying to come from different angles and think about how we could come up with a set of balanced guiding principles that could really bring the benefits to the communities that need these benefits and investments the most. So thank you for elevating that. Appreciate your perspective. Thanks.
All right, I am not currently seeing any hands, but we might have time for a couple more comments or questions. So if anyone would like to speak, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, it looks like maybe I'm seeing another new hand from Giorgio. It's a little hard to tell sometimes if they're new or old ones, but if you would like to speak, you're welcome to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I just want to say I appreciate everyone who's given feedback in support of some of these very important sort of positions and perspectives and knowledges that are being brought to the table here. On your 3 bullet points, something I think that's really important, and I may have suggested this, but I didn't explicitly state it, is the feedback for the guiding principles is really environmental justice needs to be an overarching umbrella for all the guiding principles. It needs to flow throughout. And then that will address part of the concern I brought up around inclusive transition. Again, you don't want pre-established manageable difference to be called inclusion. That's not inclusion at all, right? We want to make sure that environmental justice and especially the context of Indigenous environmental justice, there's been several works by Indigenous scholars. The one I'm thinking of off the top of my head is by Deborah McGregor, and I believe she's Anishinaabe scholar, and she talks about how Indigenous environmental justice is fundamentally necessary not only to realize environmental justice for Native communities, but to address the climate problem. We cannot accomplish one without the other. Again, these are all native lands, airs, and waters, and there needs to be recognition of that. Every injustice is layered on top of the injustices that are continuing to occur to Native peoples through dispossession, misappropriation, marginalization. And I guess, you know, speaking to agency folks, I think one of the most fundamental points, and this is a key thread of ongoing frustration, is there are basic rights and opportunities afforded to Native American tribes. And very often the tribes I work for, what we're doing is just fighting to get to that base level of the rights and opportunities that should be there as the base level itself, right? It's a continual fight just to have the basics afforded. And Kyle White, he's a Potawatomi scholar. He talks about colonial deja vu, that this form of climate change is nothing new to Native peoples. This is just another example of, once again, this colonial deja vu of this disruption to environments and practices and the health and well-being and balance, right, of all of these multifaceted relationships. So I think this is really fundamental to consider here once again, as I'm tasked to do, speak on tribal interest and concerns. I think this is a fundamental takeaway hopefully everyone has here in thinking about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Curdy. You really raised a very important point, which is we need to embed the environmental justice and equity throughout our work. And I think this is the approach we are doing as we are developing the metrics and thinking about the recommendations. We are really trying to look through our work, look at our work through the equity lens. And at CARB, we have a couple of tools, such as the racial equity lens. We are really trying to assess our work and challenge our thinking and try to embed our work through this kind of tools to ensure we are not just having equity as one guiding principle, but we are really embedded through our work and our thinking. So thank you so much for elevating that. We really appreciate that.
And one thing on the metrics I just want to reiterate is there needs to be qualitative approaches. When we quantify everything, it's in a way, or the need to quantify everything is a form of madness. Someone once smarter than me once said. And I think we really need to understand that only through qualitative engagement can we really get to these, not only the differences of Native communities, but the densities, right? The complexities that need to be addressed through all of these arenas that we're talking about. So,
absolutely. Thanks. So let's just check if we have some last raised hands. I think we could take one more questions in the interest of time. So Sierra, can you please check if there is any remaining raised hand?
Yes, I do want to just make sure anyone else who wants the opportunity to speak gets it. So I see that we have Kieran's hand up, and then if there's anyone else who would like to speak, let me know by raising your hand now. All right. I'm going to go back to Kieran then.
The last thing I would say, basically pertaining to Giorgio's, comment, is that we just need to learn from people who have already gone through this process, right? Nobody's a victim in an overarching way, but everybody is a victim at a certain level, right? But if we just try to learn from each other, that'll be the best way to learn about how to, mitigate the climate issue. People who have gone through this process, how they know how to make sure that the rivers are flowing properly, how the water table is fine, how I think learning from each other would be the most important thing, rather than, hey, we can give this much money and you can do this for us, right? Because it would not lead to anything well over time, because financial interests will come in and everything will get ruined again. So if we empower people who have the knowledge and learn from them, then empowerment is, it sounds socialist, but empowerment spreads, and which is a beautiful thing where everybody feels responsible to take care of everything that they are surrounded by. That's what climate is, right? Like environment, everything is surrounded by it all the time. So if regarding the guiding principles is basically learning from somebody who knows more. Like I would love to learn physics from Einstein, right? So in that regard, like learn from the people who have actually gone through the Americas and they understand how the land works. That should be absolutely clear, one of the guiding principles, and it should be invested in a way where, majority is basically the idea is to support environment, and then it should be for the environment. Then workforce and labor, everything gets attracted towards that. If the process is we need to sort this process out based on what we can, get educated from people who have gone through this, and giving them the opportunity to actually share their experiences, because there's not much literature even about how First Nations have taken care of the land. It's still verbal information for most of the times, right? There is some literature, but I looked on CARB. I didn't find any literature which cited examples from an author who worked with the First Nations and wrote a paper based on his experience with them, and their experience basically shared their experience with us. So I think that's one of the things CARB needs to do is, talking to farmers, they have an economic mindset because they have been making money. I wrote a comment like 4 liters of water is required to raise 1 almond, right? Because it's economics works for them. But that needs to change. That was never in California ever before. So how do you change that where it's okay? We need to compensate the farmers to change their behavior, but it's important for the largesse of the population. Thank you. Sorry, but thanks a lot, by the way, for letting me speak and for sharing you guys' things. You guys are doing a fantastic job, and just hoping to share my views. So thank you so much for allowing me.
We really appreciate that, Kiran, and thank you for the encouraging words. And with that, I think we will end our discussion session for the day. We want to thank you all for the great discussion, and thank you for your input. We really appreciate to have you bring different perspectives and different thoughts to us. And I just want to share with you, there are a few different ways to find more information about California climate investments and continue to engage with us and learn about the work we do and partner with us. We are interested in continuing today's conversation with you all. And we invite you to reach out to our team by either emailing us at ggrfprogram@carb@arb.ca.gov and continue the discussion from today by sending us any remaining questions or comments you might have. And the information that we talked about today can be found on the California Climate Investments website. And in addition to that, any kind of updates on the investment plan, including the presentation slides, can be found on the webpage as well. We will also be posting that recording once it becomes available. So with that, we encourage you to follow us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter at CA Climate Invest, which is also a great way to get updates on the work we do. You can also subscribe to our listserv or newsletter to receive updates for announcements related to California climate investments. If you wish to reach us over the phone, the hotline number is listed at the bottom of the slide, and we are available to assist in both English and Spanish. So with that, I will conclude the workshop for today, and I want to thank you all for attending. We look forward to hearing from you, and we wish you have a great evening. Thanks all. Bye.